All right. Hello, hello. Last normal lecture. I'm stoked, but I'm not you. So today on Moodle, I'll post the schedule, so all your names and like the talk titles that you've given me for your presentation, so everyone kind of know where they are and when they are. Just in case you need reminding, the guidelines for the presentation, and you can always email me a question or ask me a question if you have them, but are on Moodle. One of the things that's important to me is that you guys kind of take that into consideration, get that title slide, practice your presentation, have an interactive or two on the slides so that we can, like, as a class, be like involved in what you're telling us. And I guess the most important thing is to remember that, like, I hope this isn't like a book report for you where you're like, here's what I read and here's what it is, and then I'm done. You picked these topics yourselves with like almost a million possible things you could have picked. So I really want you to start from like why you're excited about X, Y, or Z, and then go from there, because you guys picked these things and I think there's a bunch of really cool topics. Any questions about that? Yeah.
Do you want us to turn it into like a Moodle thing?
Oh, yes. Sorry, I'll say that. So if you are talking on Monday, I need your slides on Sunday night. If you're talking on Tuesday, I need your slides on Monday night, because I will assemble them all together, all the different people going that day. So don't bring a flash drive at 11 on Tuesday if you're talking on Tuesday. It's due on Moodle. I haven't put that up yet. Thank you, Cass, for asking. The night before you're scheduled to give it. So please, please get those on there. All right. Oh, yeah.
It's a PowerPoint, or you have any sort of preferred?
Like a PDF is fine if you want to do like a PDF. I would definitely prefer PowerPoint. Yeah, then something like forget the Apple one, Keynote. I prefer PowerPoint. But like people use Google Slides sometimes. It's all on there too, on the guidelines sheet. Those kind of things are on there too. All right, so today is our last lecture, and it's the second of our two like great transformations, or great transitions, I should say. So kind of a chance for you guys to think about all the different kinds of anatomy and physiology that go into organisms, and all the different ways that science can bring very, very, very different lines of data, lines of evidence to help us build an understanding for, like, if all life descends from a common ancestor and there's modification throughout the whole time and adaptation to local environments, how sometimes those changes are so spectacular. And then getting an animal like this, which since ancient times we've known as like a mammal, like a person is, understanding how it's also a mammal, how it fits into the mammal family tree. So I do think like the title of this talk is important. We know a whole lot about Earth's history, but certainly not everything about its history. And it's like pretty clean and unproblematic to say that you all live on the planet right now with the biggest single animal organism that's ever lived. There is no bigger dinosaur. There is no bigger ancient sea monster. There are dinosaurs longer than this or whatever, but there's not dinosaurs heavier than this. You guys could go to California or Mexico or Sri Lanka or Thailand and get on a boat and see the biggest animal that has ever lived, let alone the biggest animal currently on the planet. That's very cool. Biggest is just one measure of things, but pretty spectacular. So we haven't talked a whole lot about whales in this class, because this class is focused on all vertebrates. There's 70,000 some kinds of vertebrates and like 100 kinds of whales. So they do shine in terms of being incredible organisms. These are animals that have high, even relative to other mammals, intelligence, and in some clades like the dolphins, really interesting amounts of intelligence and things like language maybe. They are mammals that are adapted to live in the oceans, which is so different than most mammals. This is a very even this is kind of a zoomed out snapshot of different kinds of whale diversity. So things like dolphins, I know colloquially you guys think there's whales and dolphins, but dolphins are just one clade, a family within this bigger group we call whales. So the scientific name is Cetacea. Just like there's a million kinds of frogs, and we call one family toads, and there's a million kinds of moths, and we call one clade butterflies. There's a million kinds of whales, and we call one clade dolphins. So there are toothed whales, whales that retain their teeth from their mammally ancestors. All those whales are facing to the right, so sperm whales, porpoises, narwhals and belugas, dolphins, and then many fewer, very few, like I think, I don't know, like a dozen. Do you know how many Mississippi there are? It's like not that many. Baleen whales, so whales that have completely lost their teeth and instead use like mammalian keratin-derived hair structures to filter feed out of the oceans. The ones that are using their baleen to eat are, maybe unsurprisingly, some of the largest animals ever, and they get really, really big. Something we're not going to talk about too much today, but is an amazing story of cetaceans, is this is an animal called a river dolphin. This is one in the Amazon River. These are odontocete, toothed whales that live in the river systems of the Amazon. They have reduced pigmentation because the water is very cloudy. It's almost like they live in a cave. Very reduced eyes because they don't have to see very much. Very intense echolocation abilities, and they're fish eaters. You guys might know that there's dolphins that look like this in India, a couple rivers in India, and in China. What is ridiculous is that all those weirdo river dolphins that all kind of look similar evolved that morphology more than once. They're not each other's closest relatives. So if you take this animal from pretty blue water, something like it anyway, and put it into murky river systems, they evolved to kind of look like this, convergently, which is really fun. But there's just some nice pictures. I bet you recognize some of these animals. Some of them are big celebs. But all right, that's whales. And so one of the things we started with in this class was this bigger question of how animals all fit together, the taxonomy, the phylogeny, the systematics of all the different kinds of vertebrates. And so a question, this is the slide I do when I teach in Bio 1102. What are whales related to? How does a scientist even go about answering a question like this? And so whales are one of these animals that have long figured into humans, like trying to figure out the history of life on Earth, the biodiversity around them, before they even thought of Earth as having a history. And so you guys saw this slide way back at the beginning of class. So Aristotle, one of the first people that we know recorded at least an attempt to categorize things in the natural world. So you've already seen this slide. But you probably remember one of the things that Aristotle wrote down was some sort of taxonomy for animals where he divided them into like hot and cold, wet and dry, where mammals are mammals are hot and dry, fish are wet and cold. And there's these funny ways. There's nothing about evolution. It's just like a little 4-category attempt. And whales were one of the only animals that he had that were wet and hot. So even back in ancient Greece, there's people looking at whales. They know it's not a fish. They've got it dead on the beach. They're about to eat it. They're like, I know this isn't really a fish. Kind of a fish. So these questions are super interesting. Obviously, you guys live in a world where this isn't like some huge mystery. Any child probably knows that a whale is a mammal. There are so many things that we know about whales now that let us assess that relationship. So not only does it do obvious things like breathe air and shoot rainbows out of its head, amazingly enough, but we can see it drink milk. We can go into their skeletons and do developmental biology, do comparative anatomy, understand them. Some of the biggest whales, this is a bowhead whale from the Arctic, haven't even lost their pelvic bones. If you go get a bowhead whale and you pull it up onto a boat because you're going to eat it or kill it or use it for oil, please don't, that's very sad. But people used to do that, and this is one of the only species of whales. It's all by itself in terms of on the baleen whale phylogeny. This is one of the only species of whales that not only has like some vestigial structures back here, but there is an ilium, a little bit of a pubis, and a femur, or ischium, a little bit of a femur inside that whale's like fat. It doesn't stick out of the surface. There's no little nubbin. And so even when people are back in the day, hundreds of years ago, hunting whales, they're like, this whale's got bones back here. I don't know what to do with that. Because if this is a big fish animal, or if this was an animal that was created to live in the ocean, it's pretty weird that it's got little vestigial legs. Always you can tell that its flippers pretty much just look like arms and hands. One of the things that's been really cool in the last like many decades, people could look at comparative embryology to get a sense of how baby whales and baby dolphins developed. Now we can do so much more developmental biology and watch these processes happen. There's a moment in one of these is a dolphin and one of them is a person, or maybe it's a cat. Doesn't matter at this stage, I guess. But what's really interesting is even little baby dolphins develop a little nubbin on the embryo where the hind leg starts to come out in everybody else. But in them, that hind leg gets resorbed. So that little dolphin in its development gets legs and then those legs go away. That's one of those things that only makes sense if you understand that these are mammals that have hyper evolved to live only in the water. They've gone full marine. They're also, of course, have live birth. So trigger warning on a birth video, but there's a baby dolphin being born. And that's something people have known for quite a long time. This animal has a lot of very different reproductive biology relative to other mammals, because that baby, like all baby mammals, the first thing it does when it pops out of its mother, it breaks the connection with the placenta. It's no longer getting oxygenated blood from the mother. It has to take its first breath. But you cannot just like slap that baby dolphin on the butt and have it scream, because it will drown. So the very first thing that happens when a baby dolphin is born is both it by instinct and the mother by behavior get it to the surface to take a breath. That's really spectacular. This little mammal being born, even though it lives in the oceans. Also, very much unlike a lot of other groups of mammals, whales and dolphins are born tail first. They're positioned that way in the womb, because obviously if their heads are sticking out halfway, they're not gonna be able to like hold that breath. So tail first birth. Really cool. And all these things start to click. All these things that make whales weird thousands of years ago or hundreds of years ago make a lot of sense if we understand them in an evolutionary context. You guys have seen this slide about 6 times by now, right? All the different ways tetrapods or land-living organisms of any kind, this is true for like green plants, this is true for some bugs, any land-living organism that goes back into the water has to adapt to that habitat, but it's going to inherit its land-living heritage. And so that's why in this kind of a class, a comparative anatomy class, we can talk about the ways that this is the ancestral locomotoric condition for reptiles and for mammals. But in the case of this reptile and this mammal, they lived on land in different ways, and now they live in the water, and their locomotory styles inherited from their land-living habitats. That's crazy. I know you've seen it before, but I really like to emphasize it. There's a flock of birds flying underwater, and there's this antelope running underwater, except it's a whale. This is really, really, really fantastic. Doesn't have legs anymore, got a humongous tail. But all right, so there's a question. They're placental mammals. We know they go within placental mammals. That's been easy. Ever since biologists kind of realized evolution was a thing. All right, so it's a placental mammal. It's not a marsupial, it doesn't lay eggs. It's a placental mammal. Where does it go within placental mammals? I wish I could really emphasize to you guys how completely revolutionary and relatively new this diagram is. If you go back hundreds of years, everybody can say all the bats are bats, and all the whales are whales, and all the elephants are elephants, and all the primates are primates. But these interrelationships, these branchings were extremely hard to figure out because all people had were anatomy, morphology, maybe some fossils here and there. But then you'd get these hypotheses that were like seemingly equally probable, and you couldn't choose between them. So like in the 90s, I tried to find one, but you guys could probably find one if you like Googled a little harder than I did. In the 90s, like all the phylogenies of mammals just like all go down, and there's like a big cloud, like after dinosaur time. It's like, and they all kind of come right here, which is an accurate description of like when they all show up. But in terms of how they're all related to each other, that was really, really hard to parse out. When I was an undergrad, I did an internship in New York, and it was about mammal phylogeny, and nobody could tell where bats were. I'm in the room in New York with these bat curators from all over the world, and people are like arguing about where bats go, because the evidence was kind of equivocal. So it's really only been in the last like 15-ish years, 20 if you're being generous, but really 15-ish years, that we've even been able to use genetic information, multiple, incredible different lines of genetic information to get resolution here. And so if it's like the bones say this, the bones say that, but somebody else says the bones say this, the bones say that, and then you crank the numbers on the genetics, and 5,000 genetic studies agree with this one, and maybe one agrees with this one, you've got an answer that's likely now. And so it's really cool to me that like all these different ways of looking at something like whales, their fossil record, their comparative anatomy, and now their DNA gives us an answer. So yeah, of course they're placental mammals, and guess what? They're ungulates, they're artiodactyls, they're even-toed ungulates, sister to parasidactyls, which are odd-toed ungulates, things like horses and rhinos. All the hoofed animals go together, that's nice, but nobody would have expected that the whales go in the middle of all the hoofed animals. That's really crazy. You guys can take that to the bank. I bet everything on it. And that's something that was like kind of maybe an idea 20 years ago for sure, barely there. So like this is artiodactyl. This is a monophyletic clade of placental mammals. I know I've shown this to you guys a bunch of times, so like you're kind of used to it, but really like let in how upsetting this is that like, as you all know, this thing is with this one rather than this one being with this one. That's crazy. That's super cool. That's really fun. And also think about this as a clade with a 60 million year history. Think about the biological questions you can ask about this group of mammals. Look at that disparity, that diversity. We've already talked a little bit about antlers and horns, maybe diet. Obviously, there's another story here of like going into the oceans. So you guys have already seen this, right? We know this from lab. It's crazy. It's really, really, really fun. There's those whipmorphs. Again, to emphasize that to you, because I think I said it to you once, but I want to say it again. This clade has a name, and that's the name. So sometimes scientists do a really good job, and they did there. Whipomorpha is solid. And so you already answered this question in lab, so I don't have to throw it to you again. But as a giraffe with a humpback whale or camel, expect a question like this on the final, because I love these kind of questions when you're just like interpreting a simple tree, but the result is sort of upsetting. Yeah, giraffes and whales share a common ancestor, but neither does with camel. That's fantastic. All right, so now I've been blabbing for a while. You guys saw that sort of reptile tree yesterday that goes up into birds, and all those dinosaurs fit, all those fossils of dinosaurs fit to help us understand how birds are so different from the rest of the reptiles. Well, we can do that same thing for the artiodactyls. Here's a bunch of whale phylogeny. These are all living organisms, baleen whales over there, toothed whales over here, their sister, the hippo in Whipomorpha, and here's a bunch of other artiodactyls. Here's that lab we had a couple weeks ago, right there. All right, so talk to your neighbors. We're going to spend some time on this. What are some anatomical features that you can use to set those 6 animals on top apart from the 5 on the bottom? Go ahead and talk for a while.
I think bone is very small.
Yeah. Let's see there. Well, I'll talk about it. So I was.
I would say sausage here. Or at least.
Okay, let me hear some possibilities here. So all 6 of those whales up top set against all these other artiodactyls at the bottom. What are some things?
This place.
How about that? Pretty straightforward. I think we can all agree. Yeah.
Increased tails that have a tail, the tail.
So a couple things there, like huge muscular tail. And I'm gonna say also that fluke on the end of the tail. You guys know from earlier in this course that like fishes, like sharks, have ceratotrichia, keratinous rods that support their fin rays. A lot of the osteichthyans have lepidotrichia, so bony segmented rods that support their fin rays. That's true for their caudal fins and their pectoral fins. Whales do not have either one of those. Whales are mammals. They don't just make up lepidotrichia or ceratotrichia again. This is like a tough, oh my gosh, I'm forgetting even what it's made of. Connective tissue, like extension of the dermis with like a little bit of tissue inside of it from the internal part of the body. It's a completely novel evolution of like the same thing in practice, but it's not at all developmentally the same thing. There's no bones in there. A whale skeleton has no like bones of the fluke. It's just sticks out. That's really cool. All right, what else?
We discussed like the loss of hair, because they're supposed to have some sort of hair, but whales don't have any real hair.
Does anybody know anything about whale hair? Do whales have hair at all? I know Cass knows. Anybody have any? All right, hit us. It's your day.
They do still have hair, like how we talked about T-Rex having feathers when it's a child. They have a little bit of like fine hairs when they're babies, and then they grow out of it.
What are those called again? I'm forgetting. It has a really cute name. So you have to look at it. It's like, it's a lot of them, like people like in aquariums or kind of SeaWorld, of course, would have it too. You can see like pictures online of like a baby dolphin, even a baby orca has like this very fine, very light, short hair that just kind of, they shed really quickly and grow out of. But there's a very little bit right when they're born. And then the other thing I want you to remember is that the baleen whales, baleen is derived from keratin. That's like a hair-like structure. So very different. But I think we can safely say something like this. Visual signaling is way less in the oceans. The water doesn't have as much like distance to see each other. So there's less visual signaling amongst the whales. Hair in mammals on land can be used for display. And then the other thing hair is used for by mammals on land, of course, is insulation. And these animals do something really different. The fur isn't going to be good enough. So of course they are fat tubes underneath their skin, and above their extremely powerful muscles. All right, what else?
Like loss of neck, I guess you'd say.
Yeah, say more. What do you mean?
Just like their movement for their heads closer to the torso and body, they can't go around like so they're.
So I'm gonna say this.
I don't know what to say.
No, there's a lot there, but I know what you mean. They're fusiform, which means like a torpedo shape, like a fish, like a tuna and a dolphin are really similar shape, or a shark. They're that like sleek shape. And so one of the things that happens is, yeah, they lose what you think of as like a neck. It's weird because they absolutely completely in their skeletons still have a neck. Their shoulder girdle is really reduced. There's no clavicle anymore. It's just two scapulae floating loose with pectoral fins, aka arms, now again fins attached to them. They lose this kind of connection. They lose a lot of stuff here, not all of it. And they get like bullet shaped. That's crazy. All right, what else? Yeah.
They have blowholes, so I'm not sure if that's like their nasal passages, like moving way up in a different spot in their head.
So where's a whale's nose if you had to point on your own body, right? Everyone's like, go like this, right? What's really cool, you're gonna see, is that whales have like this snout, and so their nose is the same thing. It's homologous. That blowhole has two nostrils. It's a nostril. Some of them it's down to one, but really it's the same air passage as you have. And compared to the bones of their skull, it's really like here. It's not as crazy as you think, but other parts of their head like telescope out. So it is functionally on top, but you have a weird monkey brain that's way too big. So you think top is this, but really, yeah. So I'm just gonna write this. That's fair. It's their nostril. It's not a separate thing, but it is very different from yours and the rest of these animals. All right, we got 5. Oh, yeah. What does that mean?
Don't have a big, external ear that you might bring a lot of sound in.
So they have different ways of collecting sound for sure, because an external ear like this is pretty not hydrodynamic. You guys jump in the pool and the first thing that happens is you get water in your ear. So they lost their external ear. Whales have, I won't say anything about it because we might hear about it later this next week. Whales have very different ways of collecting sound. Think about all those reptiles and things that are collecting sound with like their faces in different ways. We'll talk about it, I think. Okay, what else? I'm imagining like a hippo. You're chopping its legs off, you're gonna have a huge tail, no more hair, more of a bullet shape, a blowhole, loss of ear. What other things are we gonna do to this hippo to make it a whale? What do you mean? Yeah. It doesn't lose all legs, it loses its legs, it keeps its arms, From flippers, so flattened paddling structures, very integrated. There's not joints and digits. It's just a little triangle in some of them. Sometimes it's fancier than that. Humpback whales have, of course, humongous arms. They stick way out of the water, slap around. So flippers are what we call these things. Fluke is what you call the one on the tail. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Wait, no. Yeah, 7. Almost. Yeah.
They did, all of them have dorsal fins, all modern.
Very similar to the tail fluke. There are no ceratotrichia, there are no lepidotrichia in there. They have a connective tissue and tegumentary, like they like have a fin on their back. It's a stabilizing structure. It does certainly a lot. You can see why it's adaptive for living out in the open ocean. Some of them have very tiny dorsal fins. The earliest whales, of course, don't have a dorsal fin, but eventually dorsal fins are, that's a thing. What else? Somebody, well, I'll let you go ahead. Go ahead.
Whales can use echolocation.
So what's the echolocation, right? So using sound to like bounce off and stuff like that. Some of them can. Some of them can, not all of them can. So some of these toothed whales can do some echolocating. That's something that's possible in water. Cool. What other things?
They're like, protected, I mean, for the dolphins, like tooth, but it's not like tooth. Part of that.
Well, so like tooth loss in some of them, or tooth loss, tooth homogeneity. So all those toothed whales that have teeth have pretty much the same tooth, the front and their back, front and back of their mouth. The mammalian heterodont condition is pretty much gone. There's no whales that are doing complicated chewing. You either have sharp teeth for catching fish or no teeth at all, which is really interesting, really cool. How about their diets? In their ecology, all of these animals are faunivorous. They eat other animals. That is not the default for their clade. Their clade's a pretty plant-eating clade, and they have adapted to be meat-eating animals. They eat fish, they eat krill, they eat other whales, they eat sharks for fun. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Great. Look at all these things. So imagine a hippo and now do all these things to it. Do you have a whale? Kind of. So, hey, just like the bird talk yesterday, there's a ton of fossil whales. There's a ton of really crazy fossil whales. It's weird that this animal is technically the oldest kind of cetacean. Look at it. There's a bunch of whales that we understand that go up into that diversity. There's a whole bunch of fossil whales that go into the living diversity. So we can see how the early members of these clades evolved. That is super cool. Exactly like yesterday when we talked about like an early quadrupedal reptile that's related to dinosaurs and then like a pigeon. All those changes happen. You guys can make hypotheses on what order these changes would happen in, and then we can look for real evidence for understanding those transitions. So you know, birds' ancestors are bipedal and feathered way before anybody's flying, way before anybody loses their teeth. That's cool. The same thing is true here for whales. So all along this whale evolution, we're gonna see these changes take place, and we'll know the order of them and be able to figure out the evolutionary story, the ecological story of how and why they may have been the adaptations of the time. So here's Indohyus. Indohyus is a 50-million-year-old stem whale. This thing is a cetacean. It's on the line to whales. I know it doesn't look like it. That's what's so great. And there's some living whales, 2 gigantic dolphins that you guys call orca or killer whales. Probably the like hashtag coolest animals alive. They're certainly a contender. If mammalogists and paleontologists have this as their hypothesis for whale evolution, then an animal like Indohyus represents the earliest whales, and they can go look at whales today. What are the changes you guys are going to expect to see? And what order do you think they're going to come in? So talk to each other about this for a minute. Just come up with a couple ideas. Which characters, which of these transformations do you think you're going to see first, second, third, and why? Go ahead and talk about that.
I would really like to say more. But I don't think they have. I haven't seen that they all. I'm pretty sure George Thornton used to be very trained. Lots of extent that use years. So. Yeah. Yes, I mean.
All right, can I hear some ideas of at least 2, maybe 3 of these things you think have a certain order?
Will thought lots of years.
Will thought. Okay, Will thought lots of years, what?
Oh,
We're just talking about how like, you're saying like, yeah, having years out in the open, in the water just doesn't go really well together.
Yeah.
So maybe, you know, reduced years or lost years or, you know, just helpful.
Oh, I agree with that. Do you expect that's gonna be early, late, like where in the context of all these changes, like before or after, you know, pick one of those, one of the other ones? Trying to get you guys to like commit to some ideas. See if
Maybe
see if
not.
you're right.
You're not like one of the first to happen,
Okay.
but still earlier in the.
So you think ear reduction early? What's something that's gonna then have to happen after ear reduction, or you think will happen after ear reduction, if you think that's early? Are you imagining an animal that fully has flippers and still has ears, or the ears are really reduced and it doesn't quite have flippers yet? That's the kind of thing I'm asking you guys. You can pick any of those.
It seems like for it to become aquatic, it has to first be semi-aquatic. So I'm imagining an animal more like an otter, like a semi-aquatic type animal.
So imagine your brain a little otter sitting right here, just in the stand-in. That's not where otters go phylogenetically, but their own thing. But they are semi-aquatic mammals. So what do otters' ears look like? What do otters' feet and tails and hands look like? What do otters' tegument look like?
So maybe after reduced years, kind of more of a flippery foot, webbed type foot before we lose it.
Always keep in mind, right, that these are living populations of organisms that are adapted to their environment at the time. They're not trying to become a whale. So like an otter is very functional, but an otter definitely has smaller ears than like all the carnivores that it's related to, like foxes and cats and stuff. It's got webbed fingers and toes. So it's kind of doing half in, half out. You're right. All right, so ear reduction is gonna go, you think it's gonna be gradual to begin with, right? I'm just trying to get you guys to commit to being boxed in, so I can say you nailed it or you didn't. It's fine. Ear reduction is gradual, of course, and we think semi-aquatic adaptations, the ear reduction is gonna be part of that. In the semi-aquatic, oh, this is a good question. In the semi-aquatic stage of this supposed evolutionary situation, we can imagine things like irreduction going in the semi-aquatic stage, maybe other things like the fusiform body shape being before or after the semi-aquatic stage. Being shaped like a bullet comes before or after you're like an otter. Yeah, right, okay, so that's cool. So we could say like, that's maybe how we can do it, these full marine. So pretend I wrote this there. The semi-aquatic stage, full marine stage, there's your fusiform body shape. All right, give me just a little more. Yeah, Amy.
One of the first things that would happen is maybe that switch to carnivory. I think that might be one of the things that would.
How come? Oh, yeah.
You don't see a lot of mammals in the water that aren't carnivorous. I mean, there's obviously a few, but most.
What are they?
Yeah.
Thank you, manatees. There's there. No, you're right. They're most of the mammals like meat, fish, crabs, urchins, you know, it's like, and then the manatees are sitting there being like, the only ones. Okay, carnivory first. Maybe this is what drives them to the ocean. Amazing. These are just fun ideas I wanted to make you guys sit there and be like, and have to deal with. So here's a bunch of traits spread out across whale evolution. I'm going to give you some of them. They're the ones I think are kind of interesting and important. And that's the point, is just how you can try to imagine this. And it's not like, oh, you know, you heard this in lecture today, and now it's like gospel forever and everybody has to accept it. All of these ideas should and are constantly challenged and refined. That's great. That's why people do science. So here's some context I think is really important for you guys. 66 million years ago, just like important for primates, almost all placental mammal groups, there's an asteroid impact that's a completely chance event. It has nothing to do with biology. Most of all the big animals of all types, including big birds and big mammals, but famously dinosaurs and pterodactyls and stuff, all go extinct, except for the little birds, when this asteroid impact happens and causes this big mass extinction. Mammals, including placental mammals, marsupial mammals, monitoring mammals, they had been around this whole time. They're not new. But as soon as this happens, within about 10 million years, all these clades diversify because there's tons of open ecological niche space. That is our working idea. And whales are one of these first groups. They show up fast. The oceans during dinosaur time are full, as you guys are now very well aware, of giant scary monster reptiles that are now all dead. So there's fish and sharks in there still, but there's no marine tetrapods really in the oceans, a couple sea turtles. So mammals jump in. And so I'm gonna have like a timeline like this. You and I are sitting up there at 0, the modern day, and then 10 million years, 20 million years, 30 million years, 40 million years. The cetacea or whale fossil record goes back here to the mid 50 million years. That's the earliest fossils that we're all really confident are the early whales. Obviously, they connect up to all those other mammals. That split with the other ungulates is way back here. So it's not a horse and a deer and a whale splitting from each other. It's all of these little mammals, forest adapted little mammals. They all might have hooves. This lineage is at least this old. That is super cool. So just to show you some of the actual evidence we have, this is Indo-Hyas. This is one of, but by this time, especially 2023, no longer the only early whale fossil we have. Indo-Hyas is from Southern Asia. So India and Pakistan are some of the best places in the world to find fossils of early whales. The rocks are the right type and the right age. This fossil is relatively new. I hope you love the scale bar that is also itself a timestamp. You recognize this? What is this? A sweet flip phone that was like in National Geographic. Like, here's how big it is. Here's my phone. Everyone's like, whoa, is that a Nokia? That's so cool. That's like, I don't remember, 2004 or 5 is when this animal was discovered. So there's the flip phone and the scale bar for scale. I don't love this art all the way because I think it's too hoofy. You guys can see this is the real fossil. There are little teeny hooflets at the end of its toes, a little teeny hooflet at the end of its fingers, but it's still got all 5 toes, 5 fingers, running around with little hoofs on the end. Amazing. Pretty long face, pretty low face. This next animal, maybe brace yourself, is called Pakicetus. Pakicetus we know from many complete skeletons. It's got a pretty intense face, I think you'll agree. Fully terrestrial, Pakicetus is from Pakistan, the Pakistan whale. And this is an animal that's absolutely a carnivore. Not only does it have carnivore face, but it has like teeth. We could do isotopic work on the enamel and know that it's eating like a fishy diet. So this is an animal that's an upright placental mammal bounding around with dorsoventral undulation, diving into the water, chasing down fishes. Still has all 5 toes, all 5 fingers, they're kind of wide, the tail is a nice mammal tail, but it's nothing too special. That's Pachycetus. So for a while, these 2 whales were known and helped us get the idea of like the earliest whales and what they looked like. But fossils also helped nail down where whales go within the placental mammal diversity, even before genetics confirmed it. And that's because of bones in their ankle. They had little hooklets, but I won't even bother you. There's so many little things that have hooklets back then that are nothing to do with today's hoofed animals. So these things could have been one of those, but they had ankle bones that looked like artiodactyls. So after that period in Earth history, kind of the next time in Earth history, the best place to find fossil whales is in what's now Egypt and Algeria, so northern Africa. Sorry, Egypt and Libya, a little bit in Algeria, in northern Africa. So that's a gigantic early whale fossil. Those paleontologists are digging out of Egypt. It's actually in Fayum, so like not far from like the pyramids and stuff, which is super cool. There's a national park in Egypt called Valley of the Whales. Very sweet. I've never been, but come on, that's cool. This is another early whale I'll show you. This is the astragalus, the talus bone. You guys have it here when your foot goes like this. That's that joint, your astragalus. So this is what most mammals have, including you. A saddle on top where your tibia and your fibula fit on, and your ankle can go like this. And then the distal end that it goes to the rest of your foot has kind of this flat surface, and there's other bones that fit in. Look up a human foot, you'll see this shape. We've always known that something that makes artiodactyls different from everybody else is they have what we call a double pulley astragalus. The proximal end looks like everybody else, even a dog, but the distal end of a pig or a deer or a cow or a giraffe or a hippo has that same saddle shape. And that allows a huge amount of mobility in that joint, but it's very contained. They can't move their feet sideways like this. They move them very well like this. So running hoofed animals have this distal astragalus with a double pulley, 1-2 shape. When this fossil was found, this is the astragalus of Pachycetus. A bunch of paleontologists like lost their minds because this is like only in artiodactyls. Horses don't have it, rhinos don't have it, it's only artiodactyls. So when Pachycetus had a double pulley astragalus, they freaked out. And they proposed that whales go with artiodactyls before the DNA ever like really showed that and then confirmed it. It now, of course, has since confirmed it. But this was a time when like by a matter of a few years, the paleontologists like figured it out before the genetics actually got there. There is a very cool story of the paleontologist who found this. Children were playing with the ankle bones. Oh, sorry, we're playing with the ankle bones of like goats. They look like little die, they roll them because it's like almost a 6-sided little shape. And so they all had these little containers of like goat astragali when they were in the field. So they just went and got the game and were like freaking out because they had this whale astragalus. So fun. Here's that context for early whale evolution. So here's the Earth about 50 million years ago. Antarctica is starting to get a little bit icy, but it's absolutely still a green place full of life. All that early whale evolution, I won't spend time on this because you guys have looked at these things before, is happening here. All the first like 10, 15 million years of whale evolution is in rocks that are in now Egypt and Libya, a little bit of Algeria, India, Pakistan. This seaway seems to be the place that whales first evolved and then spread all over the world, which is super cool to know. Again, one of those things where it's constantly being tested. Paleontologists who study rocks that are the exact same age in South America or in the Carolinas or in Australia are always finding fossils, but they're not finding early whales. So it seems like early whales evolved here. To me, that is just spectacular as a thing we can know. All right, some more cool early whales. So as soon as whales go into the water and are being little semi-aquatic animals that are carnivorous, so that carnivory does happen early, they really start to adapt to being in the water more and more and more. This is a full skeleton of an animal called Ambulocetus, ambulation, like walking. This is the walking whale. I'll let you look at that skeleton for a second. Here's Myocetus, a gorgeous, ridiculously nice whale. Many full specimens of Myocetus are known. And then things like Rhodocetus, which we don't have a ton of full skeletons for, but there's a skull and there's some back of the animal, there are some hips and tail. So go ahead and talk to each other for a quick second here. In this stage of whale evolution, what are the trends you're observing? And think about these characters you're expecting to see, these transformations you're expecting. What are you seeing here pretty early in the evolution of whales? Go ahead and talk to each other about that.
The like.
All right, so what are some trends? What are some things?
Their nose is already on the move.
Nose on the move, right? Ambulocetus has like a pretty terminal nares, what we'd say. That nose at the end of its snout, pretty normal. But it's already a little bit, it's getting a little weird. Rhodocetus has a nose that's like up here a little bit. Interesting. What other things? Yeah, whip feet are crazy, right? Really long toes with like a little bit of indications on the bone that they're like united by webbing, which is interesting. Very powerful. I can tell you guys, like people have done biomechanical studies on these animals, reconstructing the musculature, the tail, the hips, the back, powerful, like up and down undulation with those feet. Not really a crazy tail yet, certainly nothing we'd expect to be a fluke, but that tail is the insertion site for some of these really powerful muscles that they're swimming with, especially the long legs here, right? But still dorsal-ventral undulation. What do these animals look like to you? If you saw one, you had no idea it was supposed to be a whale. What do you think it might be, just at a glance?
Second one kind of looks like a platypus.
Like a platypus, an otter, a seal. That's why when we had that lab, I was like, you know, let's check back on seals in another 40 million years, because there might be like 80-foot seals with no fur. Like, you know what I mean? Like whales go into the water 20 million years before seals and their relatives do. So different start times. Let's come back and check on seals in 40 million years, and I bet they'll look crazy. That's really cool, right? These early whales look like other animals you guys think of as like on the beach, have their baby. That's really cool, but they're whales. All right, what else? Ear reduction. Ambulocetus absolutely has these tiny little external ears. Fun. No external ears on things like Rhodocetus. One thing you probably can't quite tell is that pelvis, even though it's very strong and got legs that are very powerful, musculine, that pelvis has increasingly less connection to the vertebrae. In an animal like Rhodocetus, there's like 1.5 basically sacral vertebrae. So a connection of bone between the hips and the back. Oh, it's getting small. 1.5 vertebrae are connecting them. Ambulocetus, it's the usual mammal thing. 3, 4, 5, 6, a bunch. Very cool. A little bit about the biology of some of these animals, which is so cool. So Myocetus is called the mother whale. There's a bunch of specimens of Myocetus. The reason it's called Myocetus though is because one of them is pregnant. So when they described the whale, they were getting the rock off the fossil. Here's the face with the teeth. There's these big whale ears it has, backbone, ribs. Here's the front arm. And then there's like a teeny little skeleton of Myocetus tucked up into its stomach. And so now this is always hard to interpret, you know, it's a good idea, but we can't know for sure, but it certainly seems as though this baby is positioned, at least at the time of death, to be pointing out head first. And so when they published this paper and named this whale mother whale, they're thinking about the idea of whales hauling themselves out onto the beach to some mangrove forest in what's going to be Pakistan someday, and having its baby like a seal or sea lion would have its baby, with this big, long, freaky face, this reduced nose. What do you guys think of this art? Do you love it? How great is this animal? Early whales, especially ones like Ambulocetus, their ecology is reconstructed as like crocodilian almost. You go to the water to take a drink and you get like a whale get you. That's really cool, right? That's really fun. Very different from the whales you guys think. So a baby inside the mother being born head first. You've seen this GIF already, but like, as you know, whales and dolphins are almost always born tail first, because that is an adaptation to being a fully marine mammal. If in fact this mother Myocetus and her fetus are positioned in the way that was accurate, and her baby's about to be born head first, that's great evidence that like, well, she's not fully marine. And of course, other parts of her body, other parts of her sensory anatomy make us think, no, she's not fully marine anyway. She is capable, like a seal today, of being on land and on water. Do you love that it still has 5 fingers and 5 toes, and there's little hooves at the end of each one? It's kind of gross, but I think it's awesome. So this is Myocetus right there. And then this is kind of that next stage of whale evolution we're about to get to. What is so cool, oopsie, what is so cool is that in this stage of whale evolution is when we start to see some of these other features you guys were mentioning happen. So Rhodocetus, like I said, here's a better picture of that skeleton. So there's the end of the beginning of the tail, sacral vertebra. There's the ilium, the hip, just like you have. That's the acetabulum where the femur fits in. There's a leg coming down. There's a little double polyastragulus like any other artiodactyl. But it's a really reduced sacral connection. And we've already talked about this today. I pulled some of these slides from my intro bio classes. And so yeah, dolphins and whales do have back legs. Some of them still have it right now, just floating in their blubber and in their muscles. Some of them, we can only see it when they're embryos, but still there's a whole hind limb in there. The other pattern you guys talked about was things like their nostril, their blowhole. So this is two different figures. These whales are both living organisms. That's a river dolphin today, that's a beluga today. But then here's a whale that's 25 million, 36 million, 47 million, 50 million. With the bones labeled, you can think about them in this kind of an order. As best you can, be kind of specific. Talk to your neighbor about that nose. And compare it to the ones from the modern.
And that line is still there, completed all, it's just like, all, when you look below it, it's very line. So it's like, that's the, it must be nice.
Anybody have any more specific observations or like questions about this? Do you see, a lot of people don't see your whale or dolphin skulls too often. So usually a lot of these animals have like a lot of structure here. So certainly like a beluga whale has a pretty flat, big, round, white head, right? So there's soft tissue that makes the head shaped like this. And so you think the blowhole is way up on the back. But in terms of the bony anatomy, this long piece and this long piece are like the maxilla and the premaxilla. And the nose is still relative to those bones in a pretty normal spot. It's just those bones are like, it's really cool. Adiocetus, we're going to talk about in a minute here. Look at where that nose is. It's like humongous. It's like almost in front of and between the eyes. That's not crazy at all to have your nose between your eyes like that. But they kind of just moves back. There's telescoping of the bones. It's up here more. You could think of it like that. But you guys have two nasal bones that are like the hard part of your nose right here above the cartilage. That's your two nasal bones. And so those two nasal bones are like, there they are. This whale, here they are. In a river dolphin, they're still pretty much where they're supposed to be relative to the holes, just the whole head is such a different shape. That's really fun. These are the kind of things that are almost like, it's kind of like boring, right? Like somebody like Aristotle doesn't get to know, and you guys get to just sit here and be like, huh, and look at a picture of like exactly the thing you might expect should have happened. Oh, here's just like a mountain of evidence, and here it is happening. Their nose moves up. Not an idea. Evidence for that. I don't know. Understated, but like super cool. So whales start to diversify and go buck wild once they get into the oceans. This is a really famous one called Dorodon. There's a bunch of other really cool, interesting whales that are getting going in here. They spread all over the world once they go into the oceans. This one, you can probably guess, is from Georgia. This one is from Egypt. So go ahead and talk to each other some more. What do you think some observations about these whales? So these are whales that are coming in between 40, 30 million years ago when they're showing up. What is happening now in whale evolution?
I mean, it.
Children's like there's now, like the small. They were like quite
All
long.
right, what are some observations people have about these whales? I'm hearing good stuff.
Flukes.
Flukes. Oh, for sure. Georgia cetus has this big, long, muscular tail. We don't have evidence specifically for the little flukes. So that's like an artistic reconstruction, but the tail is super muscly. So it's probably got something going on. The legs are transitioning in an animal like Georgia cetus. Relative to earlier whales, the legs are all of a sudden getting smaller and the tail's getting more musculature. You might imagine, and you would be correct, that like scientists are super interested and constantly studying that transition. Why don't they just keep getting bigger and bigger legs? Why don't blue whales today have tiny little tails and gigantic legs they swim with? That is an open area of research right now. It's super cool. What else?
Their hands are like transitions or the.
So this one does come a little later than these ones, but you can kind of see that like still an arm, kind of getting flippery with little hooks that's on it. That's like what a manatee looks like today. Manatee basically has this kind of flipper, little hooks that are still visible. And then here's like we get to these whales, John just see this, Adius see this, full on flippers. Reduced all those arm bones into flippers. Yeah, for sure. Dorsal fins are coming in, caudal flukes coming in. What's the diet look like? Everybody's still toothy, everybody's still eating big fish. At least sometimes big fish. I heard somebody say something about body size. Yes, these animals are getting bigger. This one is super cool. This is Adius. This is one of the oldest comfortable mysticetes or baleen whales. There's evidence between its giant teeth of the little shelf that supports baleen. So this animal has, we think, this integumentary structure, baleen, early kind of hair structure between big teeth that are spaced out. That's cool. Here's Adius, a little more zoomed in, so you guys can take it in a little bit. Here's the full skeleton. Look at that skeleton. Talk about that skeleton compared to other mammals. Super great. It's so weird, but this is what's great. If you can sit there and look at a dolphin and an orca and a sperm whale and a blue whale and be like, that one's got these baleen and has no teeth. What's it like to have the first baleen? What good is half a baleen? Just like in a bird, what good is half a wing? What's the evolutionary and ecological thing that would be like selecting for like birds, these little dinosaurs to be all fluffy and glidey? Okay, what's gonna select for some of these whales to be like, I got hair in my mouth now. Yeah, Cass.
It's that bone under the jaw.
This is the hyoid. So that supports the larynx, the voice box. All mammals have the ability to make noise with that. Lion roars through that. You talk through that as well. It's a big old hyoid. Yeah, someone else had it.
That was the second question.
Oh yeah, that's the hyoid. Hyoids don't often get a lot of credit. A lot of times they don't ossify. They stay cartilaginous, so they don't make great fossils. But they are there sometimes, and they're always there in these animals. It's just like hard to find them usually. No baleen on the bottom jaws, right? No whale has baleen that sticks up really from the bottom jaws. It's all hanging down from the top jaws. In most of the baleen whales anyway. And so these early baleen whales have between these widely spaced teeth, lots of baleen. And then what's so cool is the lower teeth get these really long denticles, like processes on the teeth. And so imagine like you have some baleen and some teeth, and together maybe you can take that big bite out of the fish shoal and then squeeze the water out with your tongue through your teeth and your baleen. So this like ability to use baleen when it's still small as helping a filtration. That might sound crazy to you. I don't know 100% sure that's what's happening. And I think the early whale people wouldn't say 100% sure that's what's happening, but that's like our best idea, try to understand this. That's super cool, right? These whales, here's how big they are. These whales are called Coronodon. Two of these species were named last week. These are brand new to science. Coronodon, Havensteni was, I think, the one that was known, and then Newtonorum and Planifrons were both named. I think you can see how intense their back teeth are. There's the skeleton or the skull of one. Here's a figure of them. I thought this was great. So these whales came out last week and everyone was like excited about these whales on Twitter, but everybody started like memeing this paleo art really fast. Cause like this one doesn't look amused. And people were, the funniest thing I saw was somebody on Twitter, like an hour after this paper was published, wrote, Coronodon newtontorum looks like it wants to show you how it got these scars. Which I think I agree with. But look at those teeth. Those are really unsettling. Really, like, that's a lot. That looks like a scary dinosaur time reptile, and it's not. It's an early baleen whale. Other features of its anatomy, its brain case, its vertebrae, its ears, let us know it's a baleen whale on the Mystacete side, so baleen whale side of whale diversity. It might not actually have full-on baleen. It doesn't look like they reconstructed it as having full-on baleen. You guys said it's getting bigger, and you're right, but like, not your usual whale size that you guys probably are thinking of, right? Big, you don't want to swim with it probably if it eats big things, but that's its body size. Interesting. All right, here's like a little more modern whale phylogeny, because now we are out of the whale stem. We are now fully talking about whales and fossil whales that are in the crown diversity. So when we say crown, we're talking about the animals that are the common ancestor that's bounded by the living forms. So if you take all of the toothed whales, they have a common ancestor back here, so that's your crown toothed whales. All the baleen whales, they have a common ancestor that's like here, that's the crown baleen whales. So the crown of all whales is about here. And then here's all these animals we've mostly been looking at, which is like we call the whale stem, showing us like how we get to this common ancestor. And you can see there's a timeline down here. This is a phylogeny that's completely based on genetics, that's estimating these divergences from species using DNA. And so you get an idea that like whales should split sometime in the mid 30 million years ago. Do the fossils agree with that? The modern toothed whales, pretty soon after that. The modern baleen whales, a little bit after that. Those all are predictions made from DNA that can be tested with fossils, which is just the best. So there's that one we just saw. There's Aviaceus, Coronodon, they go in like right here. So on the baleen whale side, but not necessarily big old baleen monsters quite yet. All right, here's some like spoilers, finally, for some of those features. So things like that double pulley astragalus that all whales have, that's a morpheme for Artiodactyla that whales keep until they lose their legs. Once they lose their legs, they don't have it anymore. So just like a snake is a tetrapod, a whale has a double pulley astragalus in the modern, right? You had it in your evolutionary history and then lost it. And so you guys put together a couple of ideas over there. You definitely named a few anatomical features you'd expect to see. And this is kind of our understanding of whale evolution. A semi-aquatic lifestyle, increasing adaptations to living in the marine, putting your nostril back a little bit, getting a tail fluke. Once you go full into the water, losing that hind limb, getting a dorsal fin because you're not swimming all the time. And then we get to the crown. So here's modern day whales. These animals are outside of that. There's other cool fossils that are inside that. And some of them over here is going to get baleen. The rest of them keep their teeth. And so the teeth of a dolphin, that's like an ancient condition that goes all the way back to like maiden stones, which is really cool. And then that tooth loss and replacement by baleen, that's the derived condition for just these handful of interesting whales. All right, now I would really like to show you guys just some crazy stuff that I don't have anything to like teach you. I just want you to see them. So there's a lot of crazy dolphins. This one's called Urinosaurus. It's one of the more extreme. What do you think the ecology of this dolphin is? Go ahead and talk to each other. It is a dolphin.
Small, well,
What does it look like? It looks like a swordfish. The very end of its upper jaw, all of this part, which is part of its premaxilla, I think a little bit of maxilla, there's no teeth in it. It's just a big rod. So it is a lot like a swordfish or a marlin. And then there's a lot of little needly teeth where the jaw is shut. And so marlin and swordfish chase down big old schools of squid and big old schools of little fish, and they can knock ones out with their little bill, and they can grab them up with their mouth. Now they are actinopterygians, so they just go like gulp and vacuum them in. But this is a dolphin using its mammal teeth to probably go and grab up those little fishes once it gets them out of the school. How great is this dolphin? If you saw that jumping around in Florida, you'd be so stoked, this giant pointy nose. But this is one of those animals that you know if it was still alive, we wouldn't think it was a big deal at all, because it's extinct. It's like, whoa, such a long-nosed dolphin. Because otherwise, it's pretty normal dolphin. Here's a whale that's worth a minute of everybody's time. I'll let you interpret what you're looking at here for a second.
So narwhals.
I will accept backwards narwhal. So narwhals are real whales, and the males only have one tusk that grows out of their mouth in a pretty normal place in terms of where their teeth are, but like because they have a pretty dolphin-shaped head, it looks like it's just sticking straight out the front. So narwhal males have these long tusks that are true tusks, ever-growing teeth made of dentin, and they only have one. So they have a right or a left. One of their incisors comes out and becomes a tusk. That's what narwhals do. Odobenecetops, which by the way means walrus whale. Odobenus is the walrus genus. Has two, a little one on one side and a long one on one side. I also think it's like variable, which side is long. I'm not sure, mostly because of my own ignorance, if this is like a dimorphic thing, like males and females both, or only males, but you are right. It's a backwards narwhal. The mouth is like tucked up in there. Here's the skull. So you got your eyeball, lower jaw sits right here, and you have this long backwards pointing tusk. Super cool. You never get to see one alive, and neither do I. And so we can make guesses based on belugas and narwhals, which it is related to, but like, looks dangerous. If you like bend too far, don't you poke yourself? But I think the same thing about deer, and sometimes they do. So it's like, okay, maybe that is just what happens. I think that's great. Another really, really important detail of whale evolution that is worth your time, especially as we get into the last 10 minutes of my talking in this class, is when whales evolve in the relatively warm oceans of the Miocene, so this period here, the biggest, scariest, maybe predator of all time also evolves and absolutely is their predator. And this is Megalodon. So the giant shark Megalodon, which is easily the biggest shark ever, doesn't live with dinosaurs, doesn't live before dinosaurs, it lives with whales, as whales spread all over the world. So it's a big great white shark, basically. Megalodon is famous in pop culture because you get just shitty shows that ask questions like this and make you watch for an hour with a bunch of commercials. And the answer, of course, is no. Megalodon is an extinct giant shark, but it is a shark that has this incredible ecology of being a whale eater. And so if you don't know Megalodon, mostly what we have of it are its teeth and a few fragments of its jaws, and definitely pieces of its vertebrae, which are huge. And so just to give you some sense of scale, there is a person scuba diving, and this is how big Megalodon really actually probably was. Like, this is the most scientifically grounded Megalodon size you're gonna find. And that's still like a total nightmare. I think you'll agree. I hate it. And so Megalodon is definitely thought to be a predator of whales. But at the same time that Megalodon exists, and actually doesn't live for as long as Megalodon does, some of the toothed whales become this clade that now only contains the sperm whale. And one of the biggest fossil sperm whales is called Leviathan. So like the biblical Leviathan, and the species name is Melvillei. Herman Melville wrote Moby Dick. And so these gigantic, scary, raptorial, they're called sperm whales, are living about 10 million years ago or so. Here's a dude, and here's how big their skulls are. They've got tremendously huge teeth. There's a lady holding one of their teeth of these giant sperm whales, and those teeth point forward in the mouth. So raptorial, because they like are grabbing probably. So in the same time in these oceans around the world, you have gigantic sharks and these raptorial sperm whales predating upon other cetaceans for sure. So here's some of these dolphins trying their best to get away from Leviathan, and I think that's great. I hope you think it's great too. Unlike modern day sperm whales, which are like chasing big squid, modern day sperm whales don't have any teeth on the top. It's just on the bottom. Leviathan's got the whole situation. So that's them together, which I really like, because I'm sure it's like sort of like a lion hyena situation where they're like, all right, mostly leave each other alone. Freaky to imagine. Here is a graph that is so great, even though it seems so simple. You are looking at 40 million years of time, 0, 10, 20, 30, 40 million years ago. Total length, the biggest one you can find of different kinds of whale in all these time periods. So here's a blue dot. That means that about 30 million years ago, this whale is about 5 meters long. This is all whales together, mysticetes and toothed whales and baleen whales. Talk to each other about whale body size evolution over the last 40 million years. This is a great figure. Yeah, be specific.
Mostly they're like. Yeah. Huge. What do they have like?
All right, so what are we noticing about this graph, this distribution of points? Pretty simple, but it's an incredible thing.
It looks like they're almost getting exponentially bigger as time goes on.
Almost exponential, right? You guys were seeing all these cool fossil whales. Some of them looked intense, some of them are scary, some of them might be cute. But like whale evolution is like not really much more than this, right? So a 10-meter whale getting up to like 30 foot, that's like a really big orca. That is whale evolution. And then the biggest whales are way over here. And there is no like the first whale's linear relationship to blue whales. It goes like this. This is the farthest you get, something like 12 meters. Everybody who's over 12 meters is in this amount of time. They're spread like that. That's super remarkable. That should invite biological questions. That is the start of the ice age that we are still in. So the world getting glaciated in the northern hemisphere, Antarctica being fully glaciated, and having the oceans go up and down, the ice age starts and some whales go humongous. That is really cool. So not only do you live and can go whale watching and see the biggest animal that's ever lived today, the biggest animal that's ever lived today or ever, plus all of its close relatives, got huge 2 seconds ago. The genus Homo is walking around and whales go, that's not old, that's new, that's how big they are. Here's one of the papers that's getting into this phenomena, trying to understand it. Body mass along the x-axis. How much energy you have to spend to eat what you eat on the y-axis. Toothed whales chasing down squids or salmon or giant squid. The bigger you get, it costs you, the efficiency goes down and down and down. So if you're eating big prey, the bigger you get, it costs more per unit every time. There's a threshold there where you're not gonna be able to get too much bigger as a whale chasing down food. Here's the graph for whales' body size and their energy efficiency if they're giant gape feeding on like plankton. What's this line doing? It's getting more efficient all the time. So the question is, why are blue whales so big and not bigger? And it's like, well, they probably can get bigger. There's no energetic reason why they won't stop getting bigger. The limiting factor becomes how dense are the clouds of krill. And the clouds of krill, so there's your blue whale. The clouds of krill, so 20-meter body size evolves there and there, super cool. As you guys now well know, the clouds of krill only exist in the Arctic and the Antarctic. The Arctic and the Antarctic are only super productive at certain times of year, and all the ice traps all the nutrients, and then all the krill gather. So you have a climatic situation that forces a gathering and a densification of all the little dudes, and then the whales take advantage of it. And so if there was a way for the world to get even colder or something, and the plankton were to get even more packed, there's no reason to think blue whales couldn't like go higher. That's a crazy biological story. And again, something that I think is just spectacular for you to think about how like things like climate and invertebrate biology plus whale physiology can combine. And this thing is a brand new kind of animal. It's totally an ice age adapted thing, brand new. I think that's great. I hope you like it. All right, we'll be done for today. Enjoy, and I'm really looking forward to your presentations next week.